Hello, and welcome to the Outdoorsy Diva podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, the Outdoorsy Diva. Thanks for joining. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Outdoorsy Diva podcast. I am really excited. We have a very special guest today. We have Grace Lee. Grace is the executive director at the National Park Trust, which is one of the partners I've worked with over the years to promote getting kids to our parks and to our national parks. So, really excited to have Grace on today just to get to know her. We're going to talk about, her outdoorsy origins and how she got started, the things she loves. And we're also going to get into a new campaign that the National Park Trust has launched this year. So say hello to all the adventurers out there, Grace.
Hello, it's so wonderful to be with you today, Lauren, and all your listeners.
Thank you for being here. All right, so for those who don't know, can you just give, a little background info and tell us what the National Park Trust is and what your mission is?
Yeah, so the National Park Trust is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are national, as our name shares, but our offices are outside of the Washington, D.C. area. And our mission is simply to preserve and protect our national parks. And we do that in two ways. We acquire land to expand and complete the national parks. There's a lot of missing pieces of land inside the boundaries of national parks that are privately owned. And when the folks that own them are willing to sell them and the National Park Service, the federal agency, wants our help, we work with them to raise the funds to acquire those lands and complete our national park sites. But we also protect our national parks by engaging children and families with our parks, because if they love them and enjoy them and see them, they'll know how important it is to preserve and protect them.
Wonderful. And I actually wasn't aware of the part about the land acquisition. So that's really interesting. I'm going to ask you some more about that later. All
Sure.
right. So let's get into, how did Grace come to be involved with the National Park Trust? How did you even find out about them?
Yeah, so I think my story is one that others might be able to relate to. You know how you start your life along a particular career path, and then all of a sudden things happen and you take a detour and you wind up in a completely different space, something that you really love. I know you can relate to that, Lauren, right? I see you shaking your head.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for me, I was a scientist in a former life and a full-time worker. I was, employed in several different areas as a chemist. And then I took some time off to be a full-time mom. And then when I had the opportunity to go back to work, I decided I wanted to do something really different. I wanted to do something I was passionate about. I've always been passionate about parks ever since I was a little girl. And I had done a lot of volunteer work for nonprofits while I was a full-time mom. And so I just sort of put all of those areas of interest and passion together, and an opportunity opened up for me to join the team of the National Park Trust. And that was almost 16 years ago, and the rest is history.
Wow. And that is such a blessing to be able to be in your passion and be working on something that like you really genuinely care about, and is doing some good and making some difference. I'm sure for 16 years, you've probably done a whole lot of good. A lot of people probably have a debt of gratitude to you when they don't even know, who are out enjoying our parks every day. So thank you so much for that. And I'm so glad that your journey led you there. Yes, I can absolutely relate because when when we crossed paths the first time, I was an IT nerd working in software development for a corporation, and full-time single mom, and but had started the blog and loved getting outdoors. And somehow y'all found little old me and were like, hey, you want to help us promote this? And I jumped at the chance to plan plan something and get, because it was in line with my own mission, which is getting people outdoors, and particularly, my personal mission, getting Black people in the Black community
Mhm.
outdoors and outside. So it was a perfect partnership. But and here I am these years later, and now I'm full time due to the pandemic. It would really forced my hand. I'd lost my job, and then the job market was like, nope. And so
Yep.
it was like, okay, well, you have these other things going on. Let's lean into them. And it's amazing what you can do when you're really lasered in and focused on something full time versus just as a hobby and for
Mhm.
fun. And the
Mhm.
impact you can make so quickly is like 20 times that. Do you find that too?
Yeah, yeah. And your job becomes a true labor of love because it's something that you're passionate about. When you get up every day, you're excited to start and see what the day brings you. And I think that's how I feel about my role here at the National Park Trust. I feel that every day we have new opportunities to work with new partners, to impact families and kids and the national parks, and meet wonderful people like you, Lauren.
I love that. That's what we're all about here. And we would love to share those stories because we want to encourage other people to. Sometimes you got to take that leap of faith. And if
Yeah.
you have something pulling at your heartstrings and at your core that says that's where you're supposed to be, then we're living proof. If you don't
Yes.
do it yourself, then the universe is going to put you where you belong, whether you want
Yeah.
to or not.
Yeah. I remember my mom years ago, shortly after I started this job, she said, "Wow, I never remembered you talking about your job the way you talk about this job." I think when I would go and people would make the mistake of asking me how work was, my husband says, "Oh, don't ask them. Don't ask her. She'll be talking for the next hour about how all the great things that are happening at her job and how much she loves everything." So, but I think it's wonderful to have that passion for what you do every day.
It absolutely is. It is. And it makes such a difference for just your overall well being. And it trickles into your family too. Our kids are that much happier because we're happy every day.
Right, right. And we're being hopefully good role models for them one day when they have their jobs. They should find something that they feel passionate about, that they love doing. And I think that's how you and I feel about connecting people to the great outdoors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about kind of that nature origin story. I ask everybody this that comes on this show because it's just interesting to me to find out, how we all manage to get into this commonality that we have, which is our love of nature and the outdoors. So, how did it start for you?
Well, many, many moons ago, my parents immigrated from Shanghai, China to this country. So I'm first generation in this country. And when they came here, they didn't speak the language very well. And they didn't have a lot of money, of course, as you can imagine, just getting started in a new country. It's not an unusual story. But they did love the parks, and they did love going to visit the parks. And so, because we couldn't afford to fly to parks and stay in hotels, we had our Chrysler station wagon, which they don't even make them anymore, our dark green Chrysler station wagon with no air conditioning. And we had our camping equipment in the back. And every time there was a time to go to vacation, we would go to a different part of the country, and we would camp in state parks and national parks. So we started going to parks when I was a child, and I still love going to parks to this day, obviously. And when I became a young mother, I was able to take my kids to parks. Okay, we didn't make them drive cross country in a car with no air conditioning, but they still had that robust park experience. And so for me to be able to have this as a job is a win-win all around, to really help engage other families and introduce them to the wonders and the beauty of our national parks.
And I think that's really interesting, Grace. So with your parents being Chinese immigrants, how did they even like know about our parks? How did they get exposed? Do you know how they got exposed to them?
I think they've always enjoyed the beauty of nature. China has some beautiful landscapes too, although my mother will tell you they can't compare with the landscapes in our country. She's been to a lot of countries and all over China, and she said nothing can compare with the amazing resources that we have here. And so I think they always had that connection with the outdoors. And then embracing it when they came to this country, I think was something that was very brave of them to do because, back then, you know, people Chinese people were not commonplace in some of these remote places or rural places. And I do remember we would drive into these towns and people would look at us. We were different looking from the rest of the community. But I have to say, when we went to the parks, the rangers were always so inviting and just wonderful in engaging families and especially children. And so I really felt very comfortable going to all the ranger programs, the campfire programs, going to the visitor centers and things like that. So it was our happy place where we felt accepted and welcome. And I know not every person feels that way, but we actually had a really good experience, even though we did not look like your typical park visitor.
Wow, that is wonderful though. And you're also showing people too, like when you don't know and you're getting started, to take advantage of those programs. Like those, you're right. I may not always feel as welcome by the surrounding community,
Hmm.
but the rangers are to always welcoming and always great at making you feel safe. So putting yourself into those ranger-led programs, going to the visitor center, talking to them, letting them know, hey, I'm a first timer, I'm here. I don't know what to do. Like they do that every day, engage with them. That is great advice. And that's a perfect example of why I tell people that all the time when they're getting started. Lean into, especially the rangers at the national parks do a great job of that. They
Yeah. They're terrific. Yep. And they have so many great programs for children. There's something for everybody.
Yep, there is. That's wonderful. I love that story and I love that, something got planted in you early on and now look what you've done with it. It has expanded so much from just that little seed that was planted
Yeah.
when you were young. Well, so tell us, what do you love most about being outdoors and being out in nature?
During the pandemic, I think all of the love I had for parks really increased and became more heightened. I've always enjoyed getting outside, as we know, since I was a little girl. It's great places to learn so much about the history of our country, to learn about science and biology and wildlife, and also to feel, healthier because you're hiking, you're paddling, and you're rock climbing and things like that. But during the pandemic, I think that the connection to the parks was even greater for me because we were all going crazy sheltering inside. And I actually feel that for the parks, I got even a greater heightened awareness of how they are so good for our mental well-being as well as all the other things I just referenced. And we all have had tough times in our lives, not just during the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic was obviously very, very, it's been a really tough time for so many families. And but I feel like no matter when in my life there have been difficult times, there's something very nurturing and therapeutic about being able to put on your shoes and get outside and go for a walk by yourself or with friends. When I come back, I always feel better. I'm ready to tackle on new problems. I just feel better about things in general. And I think that feeling I had was even more heightened during the pandemic. And still today, I probably am putting my Apple Watch is reflecting I'm doing so much more walking than I ever did before. And I think it's something that I'm going to continue to do for a long time. It's just now part of me.
That's great. And it's so interesting, right? Even though we work in this space, we ourselves even didn't get to partake in it as much, as we would have liked to because we were working and living and doing other
Yep.
things. And I feel the exact same way. I've always set out to try to do that, the 52 height challenge every year. And every year, by the end of January, I feel like I'm already too behind and there's no way I'll hit 52. And so I stopped keeping track. But this year, I'm at 16 and I think we're in like only
Wow.
what week 17 of the year. And I was like, I'm gonna actually do it this year.
Yeah. It's really awesome, and it's amazing how many people I've talked to who never really took advantage of nature, especially nature nearby their homes, that they have now the light bulb has gone off and they've realized, look what I've been missing all this time. I got to take advantage of this now and beyond this time.
They are. And, selfishly, some of my hidden gems, my regional parks and things
Yes.
like that, is like, why are there so many people out here?
Yeah, I've had some of that too. But my nearby park is Great Falls. That's my closest park nearby that I love to go to. That's where I did my park my why campaign, and I'm thinking there's a lot more cars in this parking lot than I've seen before.
It is, but it's a good thing, and that's why we do what we do. And so you brought it up, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about this My Park, My Why campaign that National Park Trust has launched. Tell us about it.
So the My Park My Why campaign is just a fun social media campaign that anybody can do, and it really allows everybody to simply do what the campaign hashtag says. Go to your park close by, your my park, and tell us where you are and tell us why it's so great and important to you. And as I mentioned, I did my park my why at Great Falls Park, which is part of the CNO Canal, in Potomac, Maryland. And that's my go-to place every time I want to go to a park that's just outside of my immediate, like, the immediate biking trails in my neighborhood. I get in my car, I take my dog, and I go there, and there's beautiful water and falls and hiking trails and wildlife. And it's just a wonderful place to go, and it's close by my house. And we want everyone to find their My Park, My Why, record a 30-second video, and the best part is challenge three others in your network or more to go and do the same thing, to go to their park and do a My Park, My Why video. Think of it as the ice, was it the ice bucket challenge?
Yeah.
It's the same kind of concept, but we want everyone to talk about parks that are important to them and why they're important to them and spread the word. It's just been a fun thing to see everybody do. I know you did one recently.
I did do one. I actually, you prompted me to go. I wanted to go to a national park. There's 11 in Florida, and I had not been back down to DeSoto National Memorial in some years, since I learned how to actually take good pictures and use my camera and, all of this. I was like, oh, I need some good recent pictures. Let me go down there. And I even managed to convince the boy to join me, my son, my original adventure buddy, who is now 21. So, it's not the same.
Wow.
Before he was my mascot for all of your campaigns, and now I'll borrow other people's kids.
Yeah.
But he came along with me and he filmed it. He didn't want to be in it, but he said he would record it for me. And yes, I did do My Park, My Why campaign video on Instagram at Outdoorsy Diva. So, and I'm going to go back and circle back to it, do some stuff in my stories because I really do want people to partake. And how long is the challenge lasting?
Well, we kicked it off last month as a lead up to our National Kids to Parks Day. And National Kids to Parks Day is May 15th. So we thought it would be a fun preamble leading up to Kids to Parks Day. We hope a lot of people will start posting now and up to and including Kids to Parks Day, which is May 15th, the third Saturday of May. But we don't want people to stop there. We want people all summer long into the fall, whenever they're inspired, they're at a cool park and they want to do a My Park, My Why and inspire others to do the same. We want people just to keep it going. We think it'll be a fun thing that will have a long shelf life.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'll definitely want to keep it going too. I don't need a reason. to tell people why I love a particular park. And it can be any park, right? It doesn't have to be
Any
a
park.
national park.
It can be any public land or water. It could be national, state, local park, which I think you mentioned in your video. And it could be federal land, community, it could be your community park. We've even had local parks and recs departments, which represent, cities and towns. They have actually posted a My Park, My Why campaign as well to get their families in their community to come out and enjoy their parks and discover other parks as well and take advantage of the social media campaign.
I love that. And you did mention the National Kids to Parks Day, May 15th this year, 2021. Now, in the past, I know what you used to do was, you'd have the big campaign and you'd encourage, people in the communities, people like me to put together, some events, bring groups together to do that. And we're still a bit in I like to call it the panini.
Yeah.
So we're not we have to be safe, and so we're not able to do big groups yet. So how does Kids to Parks Day look different this year?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It's a good question. Yes, you're absolutely right. Before COVID, we would encourage cities and towns and parks of all sizes to host wonderful family events, and they were large events. But we want to make sure we're following CDC guidelines. And so what we're doing is we're encouraging everybody to still go out and explore and discover parks, but we're not encouraging people to host large events, with great numbers of people. And so, but that shouldn't prevent people from going out and finding parks. In fact, if you want to find a park near you or explore and discover a park near you, you can download our free Park Passport app. And there are lots of park sites on there, national park sites, state parks, county parks, local parks, marine sanctuary sites. And, we're going to be adding public lands that are taken care of by the Army Corps of Engineers. They have a lot of public lands and outdoor recreation sites. So it's kind of your one-stop shopping for finding parks in your community, and you can earn digital badges, and there are also webcams there so you can visit parks far away from you as well as parks in your community. So there's a whole host of resources on the Park Passport app, and that's a great way to get started. And then, yeah, go to your local parks. A lot of them, the visitor centers might be closed, but if they can find out what's available, they can still explore trails. On our website, you can still download some fun resources that are very generic that families can use them to have a fun park day, no matter where they go.
Awesome. That is really great. Thank you for bringing up the app. I actually did not know about the
Oh,
app. So I will add that to my to-do list. I'm always looking for a good resource to reference for the outdoors and to share with people. And so, why is it that you touched on it a little bit, but why the Kids to Park Day? Why have that event? Why is it so important to introduce our youth to our parks?
yeah, we have actually found that many parents don't realize that parks are right in their backyard, and they don't take advantage of them and all the goodness that parks can provide because they just don't realize that so many of these green spaces are in their backyard. But we also know the bigger picture is that we want children not only to be able to take advantage of parks because they belong to all of us. We're residents of this country. These parks are our resources. We need to be taking advantage of them, enjoying them, learning from them. But we also want everyone to know that these natural resources are really important to preserve and protect. And so if you don't have a connection to these parks and these public lands and waters, then you don't understand what a valuable resource they are and how they're in jeopardy of disappearing. We're hearing about climate change and how the environment, Mother Earth, we have to take care of the environment. And so by connecting kids to parks, having them have wonderful experiences, educational and outdoor recreation experiences at parks, they will also understand that after they see these places, how important it is to save them, and they'll become park stewards. And being a park steward can mean one of different things. It can be one of many, many different things, actually. You can be a park ranger. You can be an attorney who works in the conservation space. You can be a family member who's a volunteer. You give your time and your resources to help a park. Um, there are so many things. You can be a teacher and teach your students about the importance of these resources and weave that into your classroom curriculum. So every park relies on a lot of people with a lot of different expertise to be able to preserve and protect them. I mean, think of every national park, every state park as kind of like a city. There's somebody who is oversees, and runs the park, like the mayor. It's called a superintendent. And then there are all these people who have to take care of the park, whether they're architects or landscapers or educators or biologists, or the list goes on and on. And so, you can pick a career that supports parks, but still be able to be passionate about something you love, which could be the law or science or teaching. And so there's so many opportunities there. And we want everyone to really join us, you and I, Lauren, and so many others who understand how important it is to preserve and protect our parks.
That's amazing. I love that. I honestly, I wish that I had known those things earlier, when I was choosing my career. I wonder how different, just how that path could have been different on way back then. But those are excellent points and excellent reasons that we have to encourage children and kids and youth to get into our parks and exposed to our parks. Now, let me ask you, so you've been with National Park Trust for 16 years. How has the landscape started to change when we talk about, the focus on diversity and
Mhm.
inclusion and access to our parks? I'm sure this has to look very different now than what it did 16 years ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason why the National Park Trust has as their one part of their strategy, engaging young people. It's one of our strategies for preserving national parks. Because we know that we're really counting on future generations to continue the work that we're both so passionate about, Lauren. And I can honestly say that when I first joined the organization almost 16 years ago, uh, there weren't a lot of youth going to, let's say, just specifically about to our national parks. Their statistics showed that there weren't a lot of young people going to parks, and most of the people going to parks were older white people. And I think part of the reason why our organization started engaging with the youth engagement movement was because I had learned from Bob Stanton, who was the first African American Park Service director during the Clinton administration. He was on the Obama transition team. And when I met with him, he said to me, Grace, if you really want to do something to help our national parks, we really could use your help getting the message out to young people. And that conversation I had with Bob Stanton, 14, 15 years ago, really planted the seed in my mind. And our board chair was with me, Bill Brownell, for that meeting with Bob Stanton, made us realize that we needed to think about protecting national parks. It had to go beyond just acquiring land to make the parks whole. We had to think about changing the demographics of the people who are going to our parks, because we all know that the Census Bureau tells us that by the mid 2040s, the minority populations will become the majority populations. And if they don't are not taking advantage of our parks and all they have to offer and protecting them, then there would be a huge disconnect on who's going to protect these natural resources in perpetuity. And Bob had said to me that not only was the workforce of the National Park Service was predominantly older and white, but the people going to the parks were older and white. And so that's when we realized, what, we needed to make a change and we needed to do it now. And so the kids that we started working with, 15 years ago are now in college, and they're young people. We work with students in our Buddy Bison school program when they're in their elementary school age children. And so by the time there's that shift in the demographics that our census is telling us that, what will happen in the mid 2040s, the children that we're working with are going to be in their 30s. And so we feel that they're they're now seeing the children that we work with in underserved communities, especially urban communities. They're now realizing that the environment and these natural resources are their responsibility. Before, they didn't even know they existed. Now they know that they exist, and they now understand it's not somebody else's responsibility, it's my responsibility to take care of these natural resources and take care of the environment, for my generation and future generations. And so we are seeing that shift. It's taking time, but I can honestly say that over the last 10 or 15 years, we are definitely seeing a shift. And there's more work to be done, but progress is being made.
That's awesome. I think I know the numbers as far as like the visitors and the breakdown of who's actually going to the national parks. It's staggering, how different it is. I want to say it was definitely like less than 5% of the visit. I want to say it was like 2% in the last study, which is like 2018, identified as Black, and it was like 2%. That's
Yeah.
but I think, and like you said, you're starting in the right place. You're starting with the young people and the youth. And so that's going to look very different as time goes on. Those numbers are going to look different. I even see a shift with my generation, compared to my mom's generation in terms of how we're looking at the parks and nature and outdoors and embracing it, even though we didn't necessarily grow up with it, but we
Mm-hmm.
are embracing it now in our 30s and in our 40s, where our parents, I grew up in Texas from Dallas. It's
Mm-hmm.
my native city. And I was there until I was 13 and go back every year. All of my family's there. Literally never knew we had a national park, couldn't have named you a state park. I didn't know anything about the resources of Texas. It wasn't until I was an adult and I went back for a visit for family and I carved out extra time to take my family
Mm.
on a spring break road trip. And I was just like, well, let me just look it up and see what's here. And I was like, Texas has waterfalls? What? I must find them. And so off I went, and I went to all these amazing places and took these amazing pictures. And my family was like, where are you? And I'm like, 2 hours from where we live,
Yeah.
people.
Hello.
I'm a day's drive away from this magnificent waterfall and a freshwater spring, but we just didn't know. It was just very different, and like you talked, the access, it being a priority, that first generation of disposable income, going outside was just not the first place they wanted to
Yeah.
spend their money, you know?
Yeah, it's just a lack of awareness, and it's just also it's a little bit outside your comfort zone. It's not something that you typically would do. And that's why, we love the fact that you really promote these first time opportunities with the families that you communicate with, because people sometimes have said to us, so for Kids to Parks Day, I want to go, but how do I get started? We talk to them about being hydrated and wearing lots of layers and sunscreen and some of the basics that they're like, okay, making my checklist. Okay, let me go on the app and the Park Passport app. Let me see what's close by. And then I can link to those websites and see what kinds of activities there are to do there. So I think getting started is, is really something that we all have to help others do so that they get comfortable. And I know it's a mission that you have, is to open people's eyes to these experiences, which is fantastic.
It is, and I want to remove the boundaries as much as we can. There are specific boundaries that the studies show us as to why, our parks are not as diverse as to reflect our population. And so I love the work that y'all are doing because you are definitely addressing a lot of those barriers. So kudos to you. And just a few more questions. I know you're a busy woman. I won't keep you all day. Though I love talking to you. It's
Same
important.
here.
So just a little bit about, the land acquisition. I know people are probably curious like I am. And so what are some of the challenges, I guess, that you face in that process, in how that works?
Yeah, so it's interesting because many people, when I tell them that there's privately owned land inside the boundaries of the national parks, they say to me, well, how did that happen? How can that happen? Well, you can imagine when the national park was formed, if people owned land inside the national park, that's their land. We can't tell them you have to move because we're establishing a national park. So a lot of times the boundaries of the national park are established, and there are millions and millions of acres of private parcels inside those national park sites. And a lot of those lands are really important to the integrity of the national park, what's something we call the view shed, the beautiful views in our national parks. And so when we learn that from the National Park Service that there's somebody who wants to buy that, somebody who wants to sell that land, let me pause there. When we learn from the National Park Service that somebody wants to sell some of that valuable land inside the boundaries of the national parks, and sometimes it's lands immediately adjacent to the national park that the park is really interested in, and they'll get a boundary extension to include that land, they'll come to us and ask for our help. And every land project is like a snowflake, as one of my staff members, who is our director of park preservation, Phil Selleck, he retired from the Park Service and then joined our team. And he goes, yeah, every land project is a snowflake, just like each one of us is different. And every national park acquisition project we work on is complicated and has all these different nuances to it. You're dealing with sellers of land. Sometimes they want more for the land than the appraised value is. Sometimes we have a donor. Sometimes we have to find several donors. Sometimes the Park Service can provide some of the money, but we have to raise the rest. There's a lot of different pieces to it. And, as you can imagine, real estate transactions are complex and they take time. And so sometimes something that we think is going to be a short project, we find out that there's something, an issue with the land. We have to do an environmental impact study to make sure that there's no issues with the land, no contaminants on it that could be detrimental. So there's so many different nuances of every land acquisition project that we do, but we are really committed to doing that because you can imagine once the land is sold to a developer, it's gone. It's gone. It will never be part of the Park Service again, the National Park Service again. I mean, for example, there is someone who built a McMansion inside Zion National Park. So these things happen. And sometimes we are sad because a project that we were hoping to get, it slips through our fingers, and land projects are expensive. And we have to raise a lot of private dollars. Sometimes we get federal funding for it, but a lot of times we have to raise private dollars for it. So there's a great need for having a fund that we have at our organization so that we can move quickly when the National Park Service calls us and there's an immediate need for an acquisition, that if we have the resources, we can move much quicker and prevent something from falling through our fingers, which has happened several times. And it's just so disappointing because we want to protect the land for the parks and for the people.
Right. And I guess this is important because if they own that land, they can pretty much do what they want with it, right? You can't really control even if it's going to have environmental impacts for the surrounding land, right? But
Yeah,
own plants.
yes, exactly. There's limitations in what you can tell somebody who has private land, if they're not, if they have access to the property and, which most of them do, there's limitations to what you can control because it's their land and not the government's land, not the federal government, the Park Service's land. So it's every project is so unique, but boy, when we acquire the land and it's transferred to the Park Service, we do our little happy dance because it's like, it's really great for us. It's very exciting for us. It's so exciting for the park, and the community is so happy. The park community, the gateway communities that all support the park are so excited. And we have a hashtag we use, the last one, because sometimes very recently we will buy the last parcel of land that's privately owned inside a park. And when we buy that last parcel and now the park is whole, there's no missing pieces of the park, we always say hashtag last one, the last parcel. The park is now whole.
Wow, thank you for that. That is really interesting. I'm sure my listeners like me definitely learned something now because I do not think that that is common
It
knowledge.
is not common knowledge. Yeah, I think you're right.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, and so my two more questions, and I ask everyone these two questions, so you can't get away with it, even though
Okay,
as important as you are. So
I'm ready.
the whole name of my blog is Misadventures of an Outdoorsy Diva, which is, I'm very transparent that sometimes I don't know what I'm doing. And sometimes, as best as I plan, things will inevitably go wrong. So, Grace, do you have a misadventure you can think of, you can share with us about one of your outdoor experiences where something just didn't quite go right, but you pushed through anyway?
Yeah, wow. You know what? I can honestly say I probably had more misadventures earlier. Now that I'm older and a little smarter, I usually know, the basic things, lots of water, bring snacks, comfortable shoes, that type of thing. But I can remember a misadventure with one of my family members that I maybe because I can't remember of a misadventure I've had recently, but a misadventure that my family they they went with me to Glacier National Park. We were celebrating a land acquisition there with our board. And I was meeting with the board and going to meetings with the board. And my husband and my daughter and son, I convinced them to come out with me. So while I was having meetings with the board, they were exploring Glacier National Park. And I don't know what they were thinking, but, but they went on these amazing hikes, and they didn't bring water, and they didn't bring snacks, and they didn't bring, and I was thinking and they were telling me when they got back, they had the most amazing day, but they had terrible headaches. And I said, well, did you bring any water? No, we left our water in the car. Well, did you bring any snacks? And I was like, okay, you guys, you're embarrassing me. This is what I do for a living. And I think they thought that, oh, we're tough. We're only going to go for a short hike. And then the more they saw, the further they went. So they kept saying, let's keep going, let's keep going, let's keep going. And then I think they got a little lost on the trail. So I would say their misadventure is, and my children who are adults like yours, they have gone on many, many hikes since then. They harken back to that experience only a few years ago when I think they were in high school and college. And they're like, yeah, we'll never do that again. When we go, we'll make sure we have the backpack with the snacks and the water and the sweatshirt and the sunscreen. But I remember thinking to myself, what were they thinking? Just and so that was their misadventure. And I just was like, when they came back and told me about their day, I loved seeing their pictures. But as they were telling me their story, I just had my hands on my hips, like, you guys should know better. But anyway, I blamed it on my husband because, he's supposed to be the adult and, the voice of reason when the kid's like, I don't need a sweater when I go out, it's not cold. He should be the one putting the mom hat on saying, no, let's make sure that we're ready for this hike. So that was their misadventure. I haven't had one recently. I've had some misadventures with my team members in which we've had school buses not followed the right directions and they've gone to the wrong place, and they've been hours away from where we were supposed to meet them to do a hike in the Mojave Desert. We've had those kind of misadventures in which we're like, okay, we've got to figure out how this won't happen again, that type of things, but not any personal misadventures.
No, that is a great one. And could you imagine if they had actually gotten lost and like needed help? The headlines: Executive Director of National Park Trust family missing.
I mean, I would never have been able to pass the red face test, you know. But I have to say, lessons learned. They're both of our children are big national park people, and they've never made that mistake again. And that happened about, I guess, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So maybe they're older, a little wiser right now. My husband, there's no excuse for him. I don't get that.
I mean, I can't. I visited Chattanooga, Tennessee a couple of weeks ago, actually. And they know I love waterfalls, and they put one on my itinerary, but it was a little far out. They probably didn't think I'd really go. Well, you can't tell me there's a waterfall within an hour. I'm going. So I had a rental, and I was just gonna go to the overlook, take some pictures, and then that's it. I wasn't gonna hike. but it was so pretty. And saw the trail down to the bottom. And I was like, but I'm here. I have to go. But I did not have shoes for this. It was not stairs. It was a for real boulders and logs. And I mean, it was a for real trail to get down. It was short, it was barely a mile and a half, but it was not an easy trail. And it is a miracle I did not sprain an ankle or something. I didn't have any water either.
Okay, so I hear a theme here. And I think the theme is, when you go to a park, you get pulled in, right? When you go and you start, enjoying yourself and relaxing, and then you find that you really don't want to go and you want to keep exploring. So, just be prepared that you're going to get sucked in a good way,
You know,
right? So make sure you have all your stuff.
and that was the thing. Go back to the car and get your stuff and do it the
Exactly.
right way. And don't be me. Like do
Yeah.
what I say, not what I actually do. I have a great guide, y'all. And shameless plug on outdoorsy.com. Y'all know I talk about it all the time. It's the Day Hike for Beginners guide and checklist. And do what that guide says. Don't do what I did, and don't do what Grace's family.
Yeah, right.
All right, and then the last question to leave us with. What is your all-time favorite national park?
Oh, there are so many. Somebody who would be diplomatic would say, my favorite national park is the one I'm in today, but I'm not going to do that. I have to say, my favorite national park is Bryce in Utah. The colors of the hoodoos, I feel like it made me so grateful for having vision to be able to see and to be able to see all those colors and know the amazing story, the geological story that resulted in those amazing hoodoos with those bright colors. I mean, the Grand Canyon is vast and it's beautiful, but the colors are very muted. And at Bryce, the colors are so vivid and bright. It's you feel like you're seeing a painting and not a real thing. And back in the day when I went to that park, we rented horses and we went down to the bottom. And I still look at those pictures and I'm in just awe of how gorgeous that place is. And so that's my favorite. And I think, people that maybe have heard of Bryce, but not as much as some of the other crown jewels that are out there.
That's a great one. That's a great answer. I actually have not been to Bryce yet. It's
Oh, it's
definitely high
beautiful.
on the list. I know I fell in love with Sedona and those red rocks and formations, so I can only imagine because I know how vast and big those are. I'll be in love with it too. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much, Grace, for joining me today on the show. And tell people where they can learn more about National Park Trust and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so if we would love to have people come to our website, which is Park Trust, PARKTRUST, parktrust.org. And we would also invite people when they go to the website to sign up for a newsletter. We have a fun newsletter that goes out every month. It has something for kids. It has a little bit of information about our lands work, really easy to read, and some really great information for families. And we'll be sharing a lot more information, getting closer to Kids to Parks Day on the website and through our newsletters.
All right, thank you so much. So, y'all, I will have those links for you in the show notes so you'll know how you can keep up with National Park Trust, how you can do your My Park, My Why campaign, and how you can get involved for the Kids to Parks Day. Thank you for joining us, Grace.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun, Lauren.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, make sure you subscribe to the Outdoorsy Diva podcast. Be sure to check out Misadventures of an Outdoorsy Diva blog on outdoorsydiva.com. You can also keep up with me and my adventures, so check out all of my social channels. Find Outdoorsy Diva on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest.